America's ill will for China has no bottom line. And underlying it is racism. China should be very careful. China should not lose what it has painfully gained over the years by rash action. And he said, never fight a war you cannot win, never fight a protracted war.
杨荣文站在讲台上，用风暴云3个字形容当今世界。他说，乌克兰战争不是终点，而是西方东进浪潮的极限。中国崛起让盎格鲁撒克逊世界如坐针毡，五眼联盟从秘密走向公开，甚至联手猎杀中国核潜艇。但最惊人的判断是，中国正在积极备战，不是为了打仗，而是为了永远不打仗。因为在这个分裂的美国与崛起的中国之间，时间站在谁那边，决定了21世纪的命运。下面来看看他的精彩演讲。
Hear me today. We are in a great transition in the world. And many things may happen in this process of the old world giving birth to a new world. And this transition will last over many years. And we are now living through it. There are many dangers, which is why I titled my talk today, Storm Clouds. When I was in MTI, I was involved very much in trade negotiations. Those were the days when globalization had no limit, when we accepted that trade should be depoliticized. All that is past. All that is past. It was made possible by the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was remarkably peaceful because the Soviet Union was not brought down. It imploded. And nuclear weapons around it were taken out. Countries broke off to form sovereign states. It was partly because Gorbachev was not a strong leader. And Yeltsin was drunk a lot of the time and kept going by the Western powers. So during that period, the Western tide flowed eastwards. When Putin came into power, he saw what was happening and started to fight back. And he knew that in these matters, Russia could not compete on the basis of the economy because its population is too small. But in weaponry, it had the technology. So they invested in new weapons. The Ukraine war, to me, marks the limit of the flow of the Western tide eastwards. And now we're seeing an intertidal period, which may go on for many years. I don't see either side sitting down and hammering out a peace agreement because to concede Putin's minimum demands would be defeat for the West. And for Putin to agree to the West's minimum demands must mean that he has done all this for nothing. He's crossed the Rubicon and has expended enormous treasures and bearing a very heavy cost. So we may well see in Ukraine a situation similar to the Korean Peninsula and in Cyprus, where at some point in time, end of the year, next year, there'll be more or less a ceasefire line, but de facto partition which may last decades, like that between North and South Korea and in Cyprus, with one part joining the EU, the other part, more Russian-speaking, being absorbed into the Russian sphere. Then we have on the other side the rise of China, which is creating a great sense of insecurity in the Western world, and particularly in the Anglo-Saxon world. It used to be that the Five Eyes were a very discreet, quiet intelligence agreement. We never heard about it. It was only when Snowden told us about PRISM that our eyes were open to the kind of capabilities which they had. When Huawei started moving into what for them used to be a domain completely accessible to them, they decided that Huawei was a great threat. So in one of their meetings, they decided to bring down Huawei. Recently, the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, met the head of MI5, Ken McCallum, in London. And they gave a joint media presentation. That's very unusual. People in this business should always be quiet, discreet. For a long time, MI5 did not officially exist. To me, all this shows a certain tension, and they are now poised for a mortal fight. China sees this. He sees the Five Eyes countries, not the intelligence organizations, but the 5 countries, thinking in terms of decades. The purpose of AUKUS, which is to augment the attack submarines available to the Five Eyes countries to hunt Chinese strategic submarines in the South China Sea, is an example. The East rising, the West declining. That's a trite remark. America's ill will for China has no bottom line. And underlying it is racism. China should be very careful. China should not lose what it has painfully gained over the years by rash action. And he said, never fight a war you cannot win, never fight a protracted war. So this was reported. So I said, were these off-the-cuff remarks? So I checked the video. He was reading from a script. And CGTN carried line-by-line translation of that part of the speech. I said, oh, okay, that's a signal. China is preparing for war. Preparing for war not because China wants war, but China knows that in order to avoid war, you must be prepared for war. So there's a famous line in孙子兵法, The Art of War, which says, 无事其不攻，是无有所不可知攻也. In other words, do not plan on the assumption that the other side will not attack. Plan on the basis that you can withstand all attacks. Then there will be peace. Now, interestingly, this statement from Sun Tzu was quoted by Medvedev, the Russian Prime Minister, who has also been reading Sun Tzu. There are 3 main domains of warfare which I think China is worried about. Now, I don't belong to the Five Eyes. I'm not in government, so I'm just watching and trying to understand and make sense of what I read and see. One is, of course, nuclear warfare. China says it will not be the first to use nuclear weapons, so it must have a deterrent capability. The US has been quite determined to deny China a counter-strike capability. Satellites. NASA said China wants to take over the moon. They want more money because China's space program is making rapid progress, which troubles the Americans enormously. During COVID-19, I was listening to Zhang Guoli, the head of Chinese medicine in China. Every dynasty had epidemics. Every dynasty, many epidemics. And China's records have recorded over 300 epidemics going back to Zhang Guo. And for every epidemic, they know the symptoms, they know the progression, they know what herbs are useful. And Zhang Poli said, every epidemic is different, but they affect the same human organs. And they kill by inflammation. And we know how to treat for inflammation. So the traditional way in China to handle epidemics is lockdown. And for China, time is important. The longer the contest is deferred, the better it is for them, because they're getting stronger. Whereas in America today is very divided. A lot of people say America has not been so divided since the Civil War. The Civil War was settled not by negotiation, not by one-table conversations. It was settled by violence. Terrible violence. So this period which America is going through now, where every institution has been weaponized and politicized, including the Supreme Court, is creating very deep divisions. To me, the greatest uncertainty in the world today is US politics. It's not US-China relations. This midterm, the Democrats may face a terrible defeat. And for that reason, in the short term, relations between the US and China are improving.
Trade. And you as a minister were pivotal in the WTO in its early days. You were involved in Seattle. You played a key role in Cancun. Zoellic depended on you to marshal the developing countries. When you look at the WTO now, and there's been a great success in recent months, but that comes on the heels of years of setbacks. How do you see the future of the WTO developing alongside all the issues that you've raised in terms of geopolitics?
Last night, I was working on, I'm writing a series of musings, which has been growing, so it'll be published in 3 books. So I'll be talking about WTO and world trade in my 3rd volume. And I was going over my drafts. And I was reflecting with some sadness that the heady days of globalization has passed. GATT was a way to organize the free world during the Cold War. Free trade. It was America's largest economy, providing the basis. Buyer of last resort, seller of last resort. Then collapse of the Soviet Union. The whole world got sucked into it. GATT became the WTO. And we thought that there was no limit to globalization, that trade would finally be depoliticized. Now we know that we were naive. The world has now gone back to what it's always been in history. So when you talk about WTO, because I chaired agriculture during those periods, I said, well, it's a moment in history. It's past. We have to accept that the world from here on is both global and local, decoupled in strategic areas, and everybody increasingly concerned about the inner circles of security. Economic, food, cultural, everything. It is the result of a multipolar world. It was unipolar, with one world having its own free trade arrangements. Then it was bipolar, then it became unipolar, and now it's becoming multipolar. And China had always had a very lively internal circulation, never really dependent on the external circulation. China is not giving up its external circulation, but it knows that everything about its political stability and its cultural coherence requires a vibrant internal circulation. And that's why it's got this system of administration where no one is allowed to be leader in its own locality. Everything reports to the center, a comprehensive system of canals and roads to ensure that in any crisis, food can be distributed, salt can be distributed, and revenues can be collected. And among all the ethnic groups, the Chinese are remarkable because China has a population of 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion. 94% are Han. This is not the result, this is not by accident. This is policy and preference. Because the Chinese government have always felt that governing non-Han people is very difficult. So among Han people, you can lock down, you can do all kinds of things, they will take it. Once you deal with foreigners, then you use economics for political management. So if you are friendly to China, I will favor you. And you need only to do a little bit and you'll be so happy. And if you are hostile to China, I will turn the knob the other way, just a notch. Nothing to me, I don't feel it. You will feel intense pain. And that's why throughout its history, China never separated trade from politics. It much prefers to use trade for foreign policy than gunboats and armies. Because to use military force, you create a lot of damage to everybody. Trade is subtle. My persistent recommendation to American and Western friends is, why do you want us to choose? If you don't force us to choose, you are a free rider. Everywhere you'll be welcome because the more they see their account with China growing, the more they say, oh, this is not good, I better get the Americans in, get the Europeans in, get the Japanese in. I say, you're a free rider. You don't have to pay a cent for the infrastructure. Let China bear all the consequences. I just free ride on it. But it means that China becomes bigger and stronger, and they don't like that, you see. So they're caught in the bind. They fear China because they think that China may one day behave like them when it becomes very strong and powerful. But I don't think it's in the Chinese self-conception.
深入分析杨荣文的论述，处处是颠覆认知的反差。第一个反差是备战与避战的悖论。西方媒体渲染中国威胁论，但杨荣文指出，中国高层引述《孙子兵法》，无事起不来，事物有以待之，准备战争恰恰是为了遏制战争。当美国把疫情、贸易战、科技脱钩武器化时，中国选择的是以核威慑、太空优势和生物防御构筑底线，这不是扩张，而是自保。第二个反差是全球化与政治化的轮回。杨荣文作为 WTO 老兵，沉痛承认那个贸易去政治化的黄金时代已经死了。中国从未将贸易与政治分开，而是用经济杠杆替代炮舰，对友好国家让利，对敌对国家拧一下旋钮。这种东方智慧恰恰比西方的军事干预更持久、更致命。杨荣文认为，当今最大的不确定性不是中美关系，而是美国内政，最高法院被政治化，社会撕裂，堪比内战前夜。相比之下，中国以 94% 的汉族人口比例、强大的内循环和中央集权，确保了危机时刻的动员能力。杨荣文总结道，西方犯了一个根本错误，他们害怕中国强大后会像自己一样称霸，但中国的自我认知从来不是帝国扩张，而是用贸易和耐心重塑秩序。在这个多极世界的潮间期，时间是中国最大的盟友，拖得越久，中国越强，而美国越分裂。这不是预言，而是正在发生的权力重构。